Okay, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. So I'll begin by just a quick introduction of the Conafay Group. So we are a medicine and life science focused government relations firm. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C., but have people throughout the country. So although we do traditional government relations work in policy and appropriations on the Hill, one of our key business segments is in funding and helping our clients to better navigate the federal funding space. And the kinds of clients we work with include businesses of all sizes, academia, et cetera. And really the effort there is to help position those clients to be more successful for those funding opportunities for whatever reason they may have to pursue them. So for today, what we're aiming to do is really give you an understanding of the landscape of federal R&D spending in COVID-19. And I highlight the term R&D here, and I should probably have added the term medical R&D because there's actually a lot of stuff out there. You probably have seen a lot in the news, maybe a lot on the internet. Today, what we will specifically focus on is medical R&D related to coronavirus. So we'll talk about what is that spending. We'll talk about what are the anticipated opportunities, what are the ones out there already, what are some things that you should expect as time goes on here, and then a little bit about how we, the Conafay Group, can help. So we'll start with a brief sort of assessment of where are we with coronavirus. So, we came into this with a relatively low knowledge level about COVID-19, but of course that knowledge base is increasing every day. And it is obviously a crisis situation that we're in, as you all know. So the government is really rushing to respond. They're moving quickly, but in certain respects that response is fragmented. And they're trying to focus on what they see as the most important things first, and we'll get to a few of those. We're also seeing that the rules for many funding programs are being relaxed or altered in some way to accommodate the new environment that we find ourselves in. In short, really the landscape here is evolving on a daily basis. So just to give you an overview of where are we with the new spending, and of course this is not the end of the story, there will be more. But so far there have been 3 supplemental spending bills that have gone through Congress, and at least with respect to R&D money, the first one, which was early March, included about $3 billion for R&D, and that was for mainly the urgent things such as vaccine development, therapeutic development, diagnostics, and the like. The second supplemental didn't have any research dollars in it. That was really for another purpose. The third supplemental had an enormous amount of money for research in it, upwards of $13 billion. And that's spread across multiple federal agencies. And so really the biggest spender in the space here is the Biomedical Advanced R&D Authority, or BARDA, which is really the agency that's responsible for public health preparedness. And we'll talk more about them. They got, by themselves, just in the third supplemental alone, upwards of $11 billion. The Department of Defense got something in the vicinity of $500 million. The NIH across the supplementals is getting close to $2 billion. And, of course, of the NIH institutes, NIAID is getting the largest discrete chunk, but other institutes get some funding as well, and Dr. Hunsiker will talk about those. And then the NSF also has received about $75 million to cover largely basic science and coronavirus. So, we'll talk a little bit about the mission space of these agencies as we go through here. But I mentioned before that because we are in a pandemic, an emergency situation, and rules are changing, you're going to see a lot of things look differently than you're used to. I mentioned faster turnaround for funding, accelerated review, accelerated award negotiations, and we'll talk about kind of these specific to each of the agencies as we go here. But who are the key funders of medical R&D and coronavirus? So primarily there's BARDA, there's the NIH, those are the HHS agencies that we'll talk about today, the CDC to a lesser extent, the Department of Defense, and the National Science Foundation. And so how we're going to structure the talk today is that we're going to begin with the most applied, the most mature technology being sought. So we'll start with BARDA with that in mind. And then we'll continue on till we get to the end. We'll end at the NSF, which is really much more focused on basic science. So a couple of things just before we go into each of the agencies here to remember is just that, I've repeatedly mentioned that the government is kind of frenzied in its response to COVID-19 right now. One of the effects of that is that it's very difficult to get in touch with the government right now. They are extremely busy. They are being bombarded by good ideas, probably some less good ideas too. But the bottom line is you do need to be mindful of the fact that it's not, you don't want to necessarily follow the same rules of engagement that you might have followed under normal times. It's tough for the government to respond to all of the inquiries they're getting. They are getting a lot of great ideas from companies, from academic institutions, et cetera, who want to contribute to the response to COVID-19, which is wonderful on the one hand, but on the other hand, it becomes a large effort in kind of sorting, the wheat from the chaff. And of course, as I'm sure you can imagine, there's plenty of chaff, and it's really the task then to find the really good stuff. So I think one of the take-home messages that's really key today for all of you, if you are interested in competing in this space and contributing in this space, really the first take-home message here is that because of the state of overwhelm that the government finds itself in, because of the crisis situation, what's going to stand out is really targeted communication, really good communication, really articulating how you're going to solve a problem. Doing that effectively is what is going to get the government's attention. So we'll start here with BARDA. So BARDA is responsible for public health preparedness. Their role is to develop medical countermeasures for civilian emergency preparedness against chem-bio-rad nuke threats. And also to procure products for the stockpile, the strategic national stockpile in those same areas. But right now, because of the crisis that we're in the middle of, they have officially suspended all the topic areas they work in, and except for those that are focused on COVID-19. So don't bother trying to talk to BARDA right now about anything outside of COVID-19. This is really an all hands on deck situation for BARDA. All their scientists, regardless of what portfolio area they work in, the rest of the time they're helping out with COVID-19, and they have certainly recruited scientists from elsewhere in the government to help them review all the proposals and requests that they're receiving. So to give you an idea of what it is they're looking for in COVID-19, they're interested in 6 main overarching areas. So these are therapeutics, vaccines, prophylactics to include, obviously vaccines are prophylactics as well, but what I mean by prophylaxis here are, maybe post-exposure prophylactics where, a drug like an antiviral that maybe could be administered to, healthcare workers so that if they are exposed, disease doesn't progress. There is an interest in new and improved ventilators, technology that will improve the situation for patients who have to be on mechanical ventilation or similar. They're looking for respiratory protective devices, more and better. And then finally, advanced manufacturing. And this is something that I think people sometimes ask questions about, but the advanced manufacturing, what we mean by that is really how do you manufacture better, faster, more effectively, and do it in the US. And there are many aspects of that. So if you're interested in engaging with BARDA, there are some things to know. There's really 2 mechanisms by which you can work with BARDA right now. One is their broad agency announcement, which is frequently updated, so be checking for that if you're interested in this. And then also their easy BAA. The difference between the 2 is that if you are, you have a mature solution that addresses one of the topic areas on the previous slide. Maybe you have some human data. In fact, it's almost essential that you already have some human data. Maybe you have a drug that is FDA approved in some other indication, but what you would be asking BARDA to fund, for example, might be a new indication for coronavirus. It has to be, the key there is that it's responsive to one of the key needs and that it's a mature technology. The BAA is really meant for very large-scale development efforts. These are very big contracts and are very, very involved to put together. And of course, let us know if you have questions about any of that. And then by contrast, the Easy BAA is really meant to look at solutions that are at varying stages of development. So it's not quite as critical here that you are offering a mature technology, but even with this, it is still you're going to get preferential treatment if you go in with human data, if you're a technology that could get, for example, an emergency use authorization within a couple of months at most, or maybe already have one. And here the topic areas are limited to diagnostics, vaccines, and advanced manufacturing. So how then do you approach BARDA right now? I've mentioned the busyness of the government right now, and BARDA is probably at the top of that list. I would not advise, particularly if you're interested in that larger BAA and offering a solution there, I would not advise doing that or trying to do that without first applying for a Corona Watch meeting. BARDA has what they call a Tech Watch process, wherein you formally request a meeting. You say, what is the product? What does it do? How does it align with the BARDA mission space? And then they grant a meeting if the answer to all of those is yes. And they give you feedback and direction on your technology. Well, they've renamed this process Corona Watch for the duration of the current effort. So it's very critical that you apply for one of those and go through that process if you're interested in a large effort with BARDA. On the other hand, if you have a diagnostic or something that is a fairly small, inexpensive effort, the fastest way to get to BARDA, get their attention, is to submit an abstract to the Easy BAA. Believe it or not, right now, they really are turning these reviews around in about 30 days, and in some cases, substantially less than that. So that's really the way to go. The thing that deserves the most attention here with BARDA is really the complexity of doing one of these large efforts. It's critical that not only do you have a solution that meets the need from a technical standpoint, but it's also critical that you're a business concern that has longevity, you have manufacturing capacity or have partnerships to achieve all of those things. So don't just think about the science, really, when you're thinking about BARDA, but think also about the entire process of what does it take to bring something to FDA approval, to market. BARDA is going to look at all of those details. So shifting gears here and moving to the Department of Defense, there are a few different things going on in the Department of Defense, and the first things that first opportunities that have really come out in the DoD have been through consortia that were established by the DoD to help circumvent some of their more slow and sort of agonizing procurement and acquisition and even R&D processes. So there's a special mechanism that allows these consortia to function as funding mechanisms effectively for the DoD. So when you see these consortia like the Medical Technology Enterprise Consortium and the Medical CBRN Defense Consortium, or MCDC, know that these truly are DoD opportunities and you should treat them as DoD opportunities. So it's really through these that the DoD has released its initial kind of wave of opportunities. And the difference between the public health agencies and the DoD is really that the DoD is coming at this more from the perspective of service member health and what do service members specifically need to either avoid infection, be treated, survive infection more effectively, et cetera. So for these organizations, some of you on the phone may come from companies or other organizations that are already members of these consortia. But if you're not and you're interested in any particular area of science related to COVID-19, you may want to consider joining these. However, it's very inexpensive to join these organizations, and that way you're eligible to apply for their opportunities. But because of the unique situation that we're in, the membership requirements are being waived. So if you see an opportunity and you're not a member, go ahead and apply for it anyway. And if you are fortunate enough to be selected for funding, the only stipulation is that at that point you would then have to join. So what are these consortia really interested in? So You'll note here that there are some areas that really overlap with BARDA, and that's that's exactly right. That would be a very valid observation, and I think there are going to be many things in common with what is funded by the DoD and what is funded with BARDA. They are talking to each other, which is good for all of us in the public to know. But again, the perspective will be slightly different for the DoD. It will be more focused on service member health. So the areas that the MTech is interested in is really rapid detection, how to prevent infection in various ways, but also how to predict where infections may occur. Also interested in patient management, which is something different from BARDA. So they're interested in things like improved telehealth and things along those lines, other kinds of tools that enable healthcare providers to be more effective in these circumstances. So with MTech, these are going to be very fast turnaround opportunities. So, and we'll talk about the announcements themselves in just a moment, but largely what you'll see here is that there will be fairly abbreviated submissions that are called for, but you'll only have 2 weeks to put them together, and the DoD is saying that they will be reviewed in 2 weeks. And so far, that trend is borne out. And moving on, just to give you a notion of what it is that they're looking for in the MTech, they've already released one call that's closed, so that one they did really fast. That was in therapeutics. There is a call out right now for what is called the National Emergency Telecritical Care Network project. That is really focused on what we could say is a virtual hospital network, and what do you have to do to have capabilities akin to a hospital in a virtual environment? How do you conduct clinical trials in such an environment, and all kinds of other pieces of that. It's very complex, and I would urge you to read the pre-announcement carefully. There's a link here on the slide if this is an area that you're interested in. We are anticipating calls coming out in the future here in a number of other areas, to include those that I mentioned on the last slide, but also therapeutics for ARDS, acute lung injury, predictive analytics, which I mentioned, but also improved mechanical ventilation, and also rescue interventions when mechanical interventions fail. So watch for these. And then shifting to that other consortium, the Medical CBRN Defense Consortium, there's a lot in common here with MTech, and what you're seeing here is that the DoD is not sure exactly who's going to fund what, so there may be some overlap here. The take-home message, and we've discussed this with the DoD also, so we know that this is the official guidance too, that if you see something that applies to you, do feel free, you see more than one, do feel free to apply to both. That increases your odds of being successful. So the MCDC is going to function in a way that's very similar to the MTech. They're going to have sort of somewhat abbreviated proposal submissions that are reviewed very quickly. The areas that you see here are largely pretty similar to the MTech. The MCDC calls that come out tend to be quite a bit more targeted. So what we've seen so far from the MCDC has been specifically a polyclonal antibody treatment, for example. That came out and closed very quickly. Grifols actually won that award to the tune of $12 million. A draft RFP actually just posted this afternoon looking for antiviral candidates, and you can look this up. EIDD 2801 is one particular compound or similar candidates. So they're rolling out these calls, and they're going to open and close very, very quickly. The MCDC has also put out an announcement, a request for information that closed because they got such a massive response. However, I would urge you to look at it because it does give you, and it is still open and available on the website, it gives you a good idea of what it is they're going to be looking for. So even though the request for information is closed, still a valuable resource. And then finally, the last of the kind of cohesive DoD programs that I'll talk about here, the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program just recently opened a new announcement or set of announcements that will fund clinical trials. They'll fund investigator-initiated kinds of research, the development of technology. This is a process within the DoD that is a little bit like the NIH. So those of you who are familiar with the NIH maybe will understand this process quite well. This is a little bit of a less fast turnaround for these opportunities that are going to be in all the topic areas you see here. I don't need to spend time reading them, but do take a look. These will, what they're anticipating is that they want to make awards by the fall. So although these are fast turnaround, they're not as fast as what they might be for BARDA or for the MTech or the MCDC. There is room here for some longer term opportunities, longer term sorts of research that are not necessarily looking in each case for solutions that are ready to go or ready to be approved by the FDA. And then finally, many people, when they think of the DoD, they think of DARPA. DARPA doesn't have new dollars to spend on COVID-19 as of now. That could change, but they're open to great ideas. They have to be high technical risk ideas generally to be successful at BARDA, or I'm sorry, at DARPA. For those of you who are small businesses, there is a direct to phase 2 SBIR program that the Air Force has put out with particular topic areas of interest to coronavirus, but they are actually very open to other ideas outside of those that I've listed here as well. So, you may want to look into the Air Force and their sort of open SBIR process if you're a small business. We're expecting to see some requirements come out of the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. This has not occurred yet. It may come through the MCDC, but that may be leaning a little bit towards longer term efforts, even basic science. And then finally, the Army has posted a ventilator challenge looking for low cost alternative ventilator technology. So that kind of sums up the BARDA and the DoD. And I think with that, I can pass the ball to Dr. Hunsaker so she can pick up with her section.
Well, I think I have the ball now. Thank you very much, Jessica, for that excellent summary. And we'll shift gears now and talk about a little bit more on the basic side, but not quite all on the basic side. Discuss NIH and the National Science Foundation's response. So first, the watchword at NIH right now is flexibility. And if you recall, NIH considers itself the steward of biomedical research for the nation. And so in that context, they also understand that many of the people that perform the research that NIH supports are also caregivers. They're also clinicians. And so one of the things they want to emphasize is that in this emergency situation, they want their performers to prioritize patient care and the care of people. And so if this conflicts with the conduct of your R&D, they're encouraging you not to worry about that your salary support will continue, and that they want you to take care of the most important business first. In the same vein, if there is equipment that you have ownership of, you have a supply of it that could be redirected toward medical needs, they're encouraging you to do that, and they will work with you at a later time to resupply whatever you needed to give to a more important cause. In the same spirit, they are, as the other agencies out there, relaxing their reporting deadlines and their application due dates, and they're trying to be as flexible as they possibly can. And there's a website down there which is their coronavirus website alert page, and so you can go there for new announcements, new funding announcements, new information about the way NIH might be changing its ways to accommodate the business at hand. Most people, when they think of the NIH, they think of it as one large entity or one large unit. And that is not the case at all. As most people who have NIH grants realize, the NIH's budget is divvied up into about 25 different sections or different parts or institutes or centers that actually have the funding authority. What's critical about this is each of those individual units makes its own decision about how it chooses to disperse the funding that it's been charged with. And why this is important is because each of these different places is responding individually to the mandates that are being handed down now to respond to this crisis. And although, as was mentioned, the NIAID, which is where the response to infectious disease lives, is probably the institute that is going to be the most robust in its response. there are other parts of the NIH that have been specifically mandated or targeted with additional funding to also be able to help out in this emergency. For example, the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute is obviously going to be a place where lung research will happen. And technology development will be the purview mostly of the NIBIB, and the National Library of Medicine will be a place where a lot of the modeling that is being encouraged to take place now will be supported and funded. It's important that you realize these differences because, as I said, the NIAID is not going to be the only game in town. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So let's look at some of the funding of the ways in which the NIH is specifically responding. And there are basically three different types of support that they are going to be interested in pursuing. And the first is through a contract mechanism that is supported by NIAID. And this is very much looks a lot like the ways BARDA is responding. It's a contract mechanism, a BAA, that is specifically for treating emerging infectious diseases, and it's being plussed up with a lot of funding to be able to address COVID-19. There are also going to be some new grant opportunities. I've listed a few of them down there, but I'm not going to talk about them specifically other than to point them out to you because they are actually functioning very much in the traditional ways that most NIH solicitations are happening. And there will be some fine points and details that you need to understand, but you can see those described in great detail in the announcements themselves. And we can help you understand some of those fine points if need be. But the bulk of the NIH's response is going to be with supplements or additions to existing grants. And the reason that the NIH has elected to respond in this way is that this is the mechanism, this is the means by which they can get funding to people as fast as possible, in most cases in less than 3 months. Because in this case, there's no negotiations that have to happen in terms of certifying or qualifying the recipient of the funding. So they are expecting people to take existing awards and modify them to include some research on COVID-19. So let's take a little bit a closer look at those additions to existing grants. They are going to have budget caps and time limits. Generally, their budget caps will be somewhere in the vicinity of the annual budget cap for the year of the parent grant, and the performance period will probably be a year, but with sufficient justification, there is some flexibility allowed in this. One place where there's no rate flexibility will be in the amount of convincing you can do to the NIH. They are going to accept applications that are 6 pages long in their research strategy, and if you have 6 pages and 1 word, you will not get that 1 word to them because they really are serious about this. They need to do rapid turnaround, so they need these things to be concise and to the point. And as I mentioned before, they're going to do in-house programmatic reviews so that they can do these with very rapid turnaround. And as mentioned before, that website at the bottom is going to be a place where these opportunities are going to be listed, and they are coming fast and furious. So whatever I tell you today is probably going to be out of date tomorrow. So these particular plus-ups or additions, if you will, are going to come in 2 different varieties. And the first type is called an administrative supplement, and these are directed towards activities that are still within the scope of the award, of the original award. So that it's expected that they are only going to be marginally changing or adding to the work that's being proposed. But there are going to be several situations in which you're going to take technology or science that you're developing, and you think that it really has an application to COVID research, but it really is beyond the scope of the original award. And for these types of applications, there are 2 announcements the NIH is using. One is a competitive revision for urgent needs, and the other is an emergency declaration that was in keeping with the President's disaster declaration for the country. Now, in order to activate these mechanisms, an institute has to sign on to the opportunity, to the FOA, to one of these three options that are listed, but it also has to issue something called a notice of special interest, in which it declares its participation and also any additional information or caveats that may be applicable. These are the lists of institutes so far that have joined onto this process, and you can see that in the top line, the parent administrative supplement has been signed onto by many of the NIH institutes, but only the boxes in green are the ones in which one of these notices of special interest has been issued, and so therefore the notice has been activated. The two competitive revision application opportunities are listed in the next two lines, and functionally there is very little difference between them. It doesn't really matter to you what the difference is between them, but what matters is that you apply to one or the other, and you have to make sure that you are able to list the notice of special interest on the application form, because you have to make sure that the institute that you are targeting has both signed on to this application and also has issued a notice of special interest. It's very important that both of those things occur. The other thing that's important here is that the grant that you may want to add to has to be from an institute that is part of these opportunities. And there are some institutes that have not joined. So you have to really be careful about reading these announcements to make sure that they're qualified to join. So I just also wanted to give you a couple of pointers about how to have conversations or outreach to NIH. And what's important here is that the program officials, as mentioned before, are going to be overwhelmed, and they're not going to have a lot of disposable time to spend with you. So you're going to have to be very focused in your outreach to them. You need to be concise in your arguments, accurate, ask for something that looks reasonable, not the moon and the stars. There has to be a rapid turnaround on what you want to do and the deliverables. And this research has to be translational, has to be able to be applied to the human situation as fast as possible. Bear in mind that being creative is a good idea because there's not a lot of preliminary data that exists out there for COVID-19. And so innovation is probably going to trump feasibility, i.e. preliminary data in this context. And there are going to be a few tricks, like if the parent or institute that your grant that you want to plus up comes from is not a signatory to one of these opportunities. If you are lucky enough to have co-funding from another institute, that financial involvement of the other institute might be the segue for you to get access to one of these supplements. And I also want to point out that small businesses are much more attractive now in this environment than they typically are, because they are so focused on deploying solutions. And so some of these notices of special interest are providing additional funding for SBIR and STTR opportunities to small business. So that is pretty much the status at the NIH in a very quick overview. And just briefly, I wanted to highlight for you the fact that the National Science Foundation is also publishing opportunities in the space. And so one of the things they are recommending is that you use the regular funding mechanisms that are always available to you, but identify the fact that this is a COVID-19 application and it will be prioritized in its review and its funding should it receive a good score. They have also issued several Dear Colleague letters soliciting applications through their rapid mechanism, in which case they are also using in-house internal review processes and trying to do very rapid turnaround on these. And there are some details on the NSF website on how you can utilize these proposals. And with that, I am going to send the ball back to Jessica, if I can.
Got it.
I think I did.
Thank you, Rosemary. Yes. So finally, just sort of in closing, I think that going forward, what you can expect is a continuation of the same for some time, that things will change on an almost daily basis or even within a single day. You can expect also that many of the opportunities will require you to turn a proposal around very quickly, particularly if they're looking for near-term solutions. What we've been telling people, for example, about BARDA is that if you can't either use your product now or in 6 to 8 months when the second wave of infection is expected to hit, then you're probably going to be too late and should consider going to one of the other agencies that might offer longer range funding opportunities. Fortunately, there is a mix, and I think we can expect that money will be spent in this domain for some time. Maybe I think everybody in our circles at least is expecting that some of these hurried initial investments may not necessarily be the best investments, just the most timely ones. So I think we can all expect that there will continue to be R&D problems in coronavirus and other infectious disease, of course, that need to be solved for this foreseeable future. And then do also expect that there will be additional supplemental spending that's enacted by Congress. And then finally, I think Rosemary and I both tried to drive home this point that now more than ever, it's critically important that you deliver an effective message to the government to be able really to get their attention to your solution at during this very challenging time. And then in terms, of course, in how we can help, we're folks who stay abreast of the funding priorities and processes of all the agencies. We work these ourselves with our clients and for our clients. We have a lot of research experience on our team and can vet and shape research ideas. We understand what the agencies are looking for and can help you strategize around how you can successfully position your work to contribute it to the federal response to COVID-19. And with that, I'll turn it back over to our host, and thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you both to Jessica and to Dr. Hunziker. We hope that you found that this information was both helpful and the time productive for you. If you have any questions, please do feel free to send those to me, Marilee Rudy, at your host via chat. We'll do should we receive any questions? I haven't received any yet. Maybe we've answered everyone's questions, or maybe you'd prefer to send them to me later. That's just fine too. You can send them to me at events@conafaygroup.com. Again, we'll compile those and circulate an FAQ document afterwards, should we have any questions to answer. A link was sent out just prior to the beginning of this WebEx, also with a link to download the slides. Once you do download those, you'll find that there's a few addendum slides in the PowerPoint that provide some additional information that might be helpful to you. I'm seeing that we still don't have any questions from the field at this time. Again, if you have questions going forward, please feel free to email me at events@conafaygroup.com, and we will go ahead and wish you a good afternoon. Thank you all very much for your time and your attention.
Marilee?
Yes.
Hey, this is Laura Gunter. The chat function appears to be disabled.
Oh.
And I don't know if that's just my Mac, but I was going to write something and it said the presenter is disabled. So that may be why you're not seeing it.
Oh, shoot. I'm sorry. Okay. Well, I'm sorry that happened. Then I would please encourage everyone, if you have any questions, please send them to me at events@conafaygroup.com, and we'll put together that FAQ. I apologize for that oversight.
And Laura, if you would like to just go ahead and ask your question now, since you said that you have one, you certainly are welcome to.
Well, I was trying to use the chat function to just kind of see and check it out, and then maybe ask a question. This has been really helpful, I think. I mean, I hope. I'll wait for a response from our members to kind of see what they think in terms of how they can best use this information. And I appreciate being able to get the slides, because that has a lot of good link information that I didn't scribble all of that down. So
well, great. And for anybody who is still on and was thinking about asking a question, but felt that, they wanted to ask something very specific to their own research, their own technology, that's completely understandable that you wouldn't necessarily want to ask that in an open forum. But if you have questions along those lines, please feel free to reach out to us directly, and I would encourage you to do that.
And reach out to us if you want some help with crafting your message to the government. That's what we're here for.
Absolutely.
And I'll just throw in one more thing, just as a reminder to folks that the Conafay Group is an NC Bio member. And we do like to encourage members to work with members. So there's certainly a nice option for you if you're going to pursue some of these opportunities.
For those who may still be on the call, I did get one question by email. It may or may not be related to this. What happens to opportunities beyond COVID-19? And is there still any interest in technology for, say, for example, opioid prevention?
That's a great question. And so the problems that were problems before coronavirus haven't gone away. I think the challenge is just getting anybody to really think about those right now. They are still there. And for example, the DoD programs that are always out there every year, those are still there. For example, research programs focused on opioid addiction, detection, countermeasures, et cetera, you name it, those are all still there. I would expect slower than usual responses on a number of things, particularly if they're not related to coronavirus, but they are still there, and the NIH deadlines that exist are still there as well. So it's not that all these things are gone away. It's just that everybody is distracted by coronavirus at the moment.
Yes, the NIH publishes a weekly advisory on the new opportunities that they have announced over the past week. You can sign up for it at the NIH Guide. If you Google NIH Guide, you'll get there pretty quickly. And you can sign up for a weekly email notice. And I can tell you that since the beginning of this crisis, only about a third to a half of the new announcements concern coronavirus. They are still doing all of the business that they are currently doing and announcing other opportunities along the way. So, the business at hand is going to continue to go on, only, as Jessica said, probably at a slightly diminished and slower pace.
All right. Well, thank you guys very much. Thank you again for listening in, and thanks again to Jessica and Dr. Hunziker for sharing with us. Again, please, if you have any questions, feel free to email those to me since I messed up the chat. My apologies. You can email those to me at events@conafaygroup.com. Thanks again.